for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Fudge, we've discussed the importance of addressing our nation's affordable housing crisis head on. And I know that you are committed to increasing the number of affordable units available to families. But those homes have to be built somewhere. And too many communities around the country, restrictive zoning laws that were born out of racial segregation prevent new affordable housing units from being built. Using exclusionary zoning to keep families, often lower income families and families of color, out of certain neighborhoods is wrong. And over time, the harm really adds up. Exclusionary practices drive up the cost of housing for everyone and reduce the amount of available land. So, Secretary Fudge, at your confirmation hearing, you told this committee that it is important that we get rid of the notion of not in my backyard. How does that not in my backyard approach impede efforts to address the affordable housing crisis?
Well, first off, thank you, Senator, for our ongoing conversations about this. The first thing that it does is it increases the cost of housing and it limits where we can build housing. If you have restrictive zoning ordinances, then there are two things that happen or can happen. One is that where there is available land, you cannot build, or the zoning is so onerous that it costs you more money to build. Maybe they put all kinds of restrictions on it that increase the cost of buying the property. The other thing it does is it just basically says to people in our communities, we do not want you to live in our neighborhood if you are low income, if you are a person of color. And so what we have found is that these laws have been around so very long that the jobs plan now gives us the opportunity to go into communities with some incentives to assist them in how we discuss it, how we can give them the kind of technical assistance to change it, how we engage communities so that we can have a better narrative about why we should allow new housing and housing that is not restrictive in communities that historically have prevented us from building.
Right. So let me follow up on that. How would incentives help? Aren't these changes that the federal government can just make on its own to get this housing built? Or why do you need these incentives?
Well, they really can't. A lot of the zoning laws are really just local. They're local ordinances, many of which we cannot change as a federal government. Now, we can talk about discrimination overall. We can talk about civil rights overall, but we cannot just go into a community and change all of their zoning or planning ordinances. And that is why we want to engage communities with conversation, with technical assistance, to talk to them about how they can change them, how they can, maybe we can come to some agreement that makes them not as restrictive and not as costly.
Well, I completely agree with the direction you're going here. My American Housing and Economic Mobility Act includes a new $10 billion housing innovation grant program that would provide funding so that local governments can use it to build things like parks or schools if they are actively removing unnecessary barriers to building affordable units in their communities. Eligible reforms would include things like changing bans on multifamily construction, revising minimum lot size requirements, or passing inclusionary zoning ordinances. So let me ask, Secretary Fudge, could this kind of grant program make a difference in pushing communities to expand the supply of affordable housing?
There's no question but that it can be helpful.
Good.
And it's certainly something that I'd like to really get into some more detail with you about, because until we can get to that point that we can include the kinds of things you're talking about, we're going to forever have people locked out of communities of opportunity, given the opportunity to go to better schools, to have better jobs, and to build wealth. So I would very much like us to continue that conversation.
Oh, and I very much want to work with you on this. You know, I was so glad to see President Biden call for the elimination of exclusionary zoning and to end harmful land use policies as part of his American Jobs Plan. And now I got a proposal ready to go on this. Taking on our affordable housing crisis requires a comprehensive strategy, and reducing exclusionary zoning and land use restrictions has to be a part of this. So thank you, Secretary Fudge, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Cortez Masto is recognized for 5 minutes from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And thank you to both Secretaries Buttigieg and Fudge.